We always love to get into these kind of like hidden parts of history, the stuff that really flips your perspective. And, well, get ready. Because this deep dive we're going into, this one might just completely change how you think about, I don't know, West Africa, the whole concept of Arab identity, all of it.
Yeah, this is big.
We've been looking at some sources, and they suggest something pretty mind-blowing. A deep connection between some of the biggest West African ethnic groups, the Yoruba, Hausa, Fulani, Mandingo, Akan, even the Ashanti.
Right, right.
And get this, they might be linked to ancient black Arab tribes, all the way from the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. This is not your typical history book stuff.
Absolutely not. I mean, for so long, the way we talk about these regions, it's like they're totally separate worlds, right? But the evidence is there. We've looked at language analysis, historical accounts, even family trees, genealogical records. And what they show is it's all way more connected than most people realize.
So basically, we're talking about connections that could seriously challenge a lot of the assumptions we have about where these different peoples came from and how they interacted.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Okay, so our mission today, we're going to try to do is unpack all this info for you. It's big, potentially paradigm-shifting stuff, and we want to make it clear, make it engaging.
Yeah.
And get you thinking about the bigger picture.
So where do we even start? I guess language is a good place. Specifically, the Yoruba language. Let's talk about that.
All right, so language. Language is fascinating, right? It's like a secret map of the past. When you see two languages that have big similarities, like not just a few words, but in how they sound and what those words actually mean.
Right.
It usually points to a much deeper link, a historical connection, than just, borrowing a phrase here or there.
And we saw this really highlighted in that excerpt we read, a study of relationship between Arabic and Yoruba.
It really emphasized that when you have those twin similarities in both the form of the words and their meanings, it's kind of hard to just brush it off as coincidence. There has to be a historical explanation.
Exactly. You can't ignore it. And the excerpt even mentions something called genetic interference, which sounds, very scientific.
Yeah.
But it basically means, think of it like a family tree, but for languages, right? Where two languages split off from a common ancestor way, way back.
Wow.
And because of that, they keep those core similarities. It's not just borrowing, it's like a shared origin. So when you apply that to Arabic and Yoruba, it makes you think maybe their relationship is way more fundamental, way more ancient than we usually imagine. It's not just a few similar words, it's a much deeper connection, maybe even a shared root, which really challenges the way we usually think about them being completely separate.
Okay, so language can be a powerful connector. But then there's the whole question of what Arab even means. It's not just about people living in the Middle East today, right?
Right. It's much bigger than that. And that's where imported the unknown Arabs comes in. That source makes a really strong argument for expanding our understanding of who can be considered Arab. It says a lot of groups that have been excluded from that definition historically have just as much right to it.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, I think. Because the source talks about 4 different types of Arabs.
Right.
All of them tracing their lineage all the way back to Sam, Noah's son. A major figure, in the Abrahamic traditions, ancestor to a lot of Middle Eastern peoples. So first you have the Arab el-Baida. These are the extinct Arab tribes from way, way back. Then there's the Arab el-Ariba, also known as the Qahtani Arabs. They're considered the original Arabs from southern Arabia.
Yeah, the ones who really started it all. And then you have the Arab el-Mustariba, the Adnani Arabs. These guys, they were descendants of Ishmael. They actually didn't speak Arabic originally, but they adopted it later on. The Prophet Muhammad's tribe, the Quraysh, they came from this line. Yeah, so there's a lot of history there. And then the fourth group, this one's really interesting because it broadens things even further.
Okay, tell me more.
This is the Banu Keturah. Like the others, they're also traced back to Sam, but through a different line. So when you look at all these different classifications, it really makes you rethink, who were these early Arabs? Where did they come from? Where did they travel? It opens up a whole world of possibilities for historical connections, going way beyond what we usually think of as the traditional Arab world.
So it's like we need to totally adjust our mental picture, right? We need to think bigger, wider.
Exactly, yeah.
And that brings us to, I guess, the migrations, these ancient Arab migrations into Africa. And we're talking way before the rise of Islam, right?
Yes, this is crucial. This is one of the key points that imported the unknown Arabs really emphasizes. The source actually quotes this historian, Dr. Abdel Fattah al-Ghanimi, who says, waves of Arab migration into Africa. It's been happening since forever. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not just tied to the Islamic conquests. It's been continuous for centuries, millennia even.
And we're not just talking about small groups of people wandering around there. This is potentially huge movements of people using routes like the Bab el-Mandab crossing the Red Sea.
Oh yeah, big time. And the source gives some really interesting examples of these ancient Arab groups that may have made these journeys. Like, think about the Phoenicians. They were famous for their seafaring, their trade all over the Mediterranean. Then you have the Elamites from Mesopotamia, an ancient civilization.
Right.
And what's interesting is some historical accounts describe them as having darker complexions, kinky hair, but the source we're using, it insists they were Semites, early Arab ancestors, pushing back against any kind of Negroid classifications.
So even descriptions that seem to put them outside the typical image we have of Arab, they're being reinterpreted. It's fascinating.
It really is. Like, we're uncovering this whole hidden history. And then you have the Carthaginians, another major power in North Africa. They were descended from the Phoenicians. The Sabians from South Arabia, famous for their wealth, the Queen of Sheba, all that. And even the Hyksos, who ruled parts of ancient Egypt for a time. The source argues that all this pre-Islamic Arab migration to Africa, it's been seriously underestimated by historians. So we're talking about people moving across continents long before what we usually think of as the main period of Arab influence in Africa. It really challenges that linear later stage narrative, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's this one specific account I found it really intriguing, the story of the tuba.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. It comes from Palmer's Sudanese memoirs. It tells the story of this Himyarite Tuba, basically a king named Umatu and his people. They migrated from Yemen, crossed the Red Sea, landed on the African coast. And again, this is all pre-Islamic.
And it wasn't just like warriors, leaders. They had intellectuals among them too, right?
Yeah, totally. The account mentions these learned men of the Banu Adam, even names them Abdullahi and Ibrahim. So they were established on the African coast for a good while.
But the journey didn't end there.
No, it didn't. After their leader died, they ended up splitting up. And some of them, they were known as the Beni Mualim Adam. They kept going west, all the way to Ingazargamu in modern-day Bornu, Nigeria. And there, they met the Shosha people, who might have been descendants of another ancient Arab tribe, the Ad.
Wow, so we have these accounts of migration and settlement that go deep into West Africa, going back centuries. It really makes you wonder about the impact over time. But, you know, one of the things that seems to mess with our understanding of all this is how we interpret old descriptions, especially when it comes to how people looked.
Oh, totally. Language changes, meanings change. That's one of the points that Imported the Unknown Arabs makes. Our modern understanding of those old Arabic terms for describing people can lead to some big misunderstandings about how those early Arabs actually looked.
Right.
Words like green, Adam, which could mean dark, shaded, eludma, very Adam, even yellow, white, red, brown, all these color terms, they might have had different meanings back then. Like, for example, the source says when ancient Arabs said someone was white, they might have been talking about a smooth, dark complexion, not a light European skin tone.
So it's like we're reading these old texts with the wrong dictionary.
Yeah, kind of. And understanding those different meanings is really important because it means a lot of key historical figures, Arabs, they were described in ways that point to a darker complexion. And this is a big deal because it leads to this really surprising claim in our source.
That much of pre-colonial West Africa was either Arab or considered part of the Arab world. It's huge.
Yeah, it's a bold claim. But it's based on the fact that Arabic was spoken in a lot of these regions, and claims of Arab ancestry were pretty common. And the source points out that before colonialism, before those artificial borders were drawn, tribes moved freely across huge areas. They didn't care about modern-day country boundaries.
Right, we have those examples of the Brakna and Trarza tribes. They're spread across multiple countries today.
Exactly. And that fluidity, the shared cultures, the languages, it all feeds into this idea that the way we see it today, this sharp division between West Africa and the Arab world, it might not be accurate at all when you look at the historical reality before Europe came in and messed things up.
But if those connections were so strong, why don't we see them more today? I mean, why aren't they more widely known? Our source talks about assimilation, how Arab identity might have been lost over time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Muhammad Suleiman El-Tayyib, he offers one perspective on this. He says, these Arab tribes, they migrated south, deeper into Africa, mixed with local populations, and over time, they lost their Arabic language, that conscious connection to their Arab roots. Time does that, and the source argues that colonizers sped up the process.
So they actively tried to break those connections.
That's what the source suggests, yeah. They pushed certain narratives, they controlled the education systems, and as a result, those Arab links were downplayed, even erased in some cases. And people ended up disconnected from their own heritage. They give the example of Senegal. The name itself comes from the Sanhaja, an Arab tribe. But today, the region has mostly abandoned its Arabism, the Arabic language.
It's like a deliberate rewriting of history.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Now, before we go deeper into those specific West African connections, the source mentions another group briefly, the Berbers, the Amazi, and there's a suggestion they might also be linked to these early migrations.
Yeah, the source acknowledges the Berbers as another ancient group with potential connections to those migrations from the Arabian Peninsula. But it also says, look, the specific tribal relationships, how deep those connections go, we need more research. It's beyond the scope of what we have right now.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe a topic for another deep dive. But one of the things that I found really compelling in this source material, and it's something that really makes you think, are these descriptions of prominent historical figures, Arabs, as being dark-skinned.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And we're not talking about vague hints. These are direct descriptions of key individuals. It really forces us to rethink that visual narrative we have, when we think about those early Islamic figures, those societies.
Absolutely. Imported the Unknown Arabs gives us a ton of examples that challenge that modern perception of Arabs as being mostly light-skinned. Like, take Abdullah ibn Masud. He was a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad from a respected tribe, the Hudhau. He's described as short, thin, black-skinned.
And it's not just him.
No, not at all. There's Abdullah ibn Umar, son of Caliph Umar from the Quraysh tribe, a really influential tribe. Then there's Abdullah ibn Abbas, the Prophet's cousin, described as tall, large, and black-skinned. His son Ali, huge and black-skinned. So we're talking about central figures in early Islamic history, and they're described as being dark-skinned. It really makes you reevaluate those assumptions we have.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. Sana Gaihab, he got that nickname because of his dark complexion. Du El Ruma, this 8th century poet, described as black-eyed, black-skinned, and unattractive. El Sa'ik, a chief of the Nadi tribe in Yemen, short, black-skinned, and unattractive. And even entire tribes, like the Banu Sulaim, the source says they were whole tribes that are black-skinned.
Yeah, and the source keeps emphasizing that these people, these groups, they were considered pure-blooded Arabs. From noble families, important lineages, it wasn't a matter of mixed ancestry. And it goes back to that point about the term white as used by Arabs historically. They might have been something very different, a smooth, dark complexion, not the fair European skin we think of today.
So what changed? Why is the perception of Arab appearance so different in many parts of the world today?
Well, the source addresses this by talking about a hadith, a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. It's about black sheep, representing Arabs, being outnumbered by white sheep, interpreted as non-Arabs who converted to Islam. So it suggests this increase in the non-Arab Muslim population over time.
Right, and we also have Morbia's observation about the growing number of what he called white folks.
Exactly. So those accounts, they point to this big influx of non-Arabs into the Islamic world. And then, over centuries, people mixed. And the source says that lighter complexion that's common in many Arab regions today, it's probably a result of that mixing. It's interesting because it flips the usual narrative, where people assume darker-skinned Arabs are the result of mixing with Africans.
It's like everything we thought we knew was being turned upside down. Now, bringing it back to the Americas, the source makes this really powerful argument that some of the people brought to the New World as slaves, they were actually of Arab origin. And hearing those individual stories, it makes it so much more real.
It does. And the source points out that Arabs were enslaved in a lot of places: Oman, Andalusia, Morocco, Mauritania. Plus, you had those Arab tribes within Africa, the Shurafa, Kunta, Trarza, Brakna, Shua. Some of them were definitely caught up in the slave trade. Even the remnants of the Umayyads who migrated to the Lake Chad region.
Yeah, it wasn't just one group, one place. It was much more widespread. And we even get those specific examples. Ben Ali in Georgia, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq from Timbuktu, taken to the West Indies.
It's a reminder of the huge diversity of people who were enslaved, And we have to remember all those West African groups, too. The Wolof, Meningo, Fulani, Akan, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Congo, so many different peoples, all caught up in this horrific system. It's a really complex history.
And it leads us to those specific West African groups we talked about at the beginning and their potential Arab ancestry. Our source offers some really interesting possibilities here. So let's start with the Mendingo. What do we know?
The source suggests the Mandingo are a mix of two groups. You have the Gara, also known as the Garamantes, possibly with origins in Elam or Kush.
Right.
And then the Zagawa, who are identified as part of the Juhayna branch of Himyarite Arabs from Yemen, related to the Sanhaja. And it's interesting, there are traditions linking the Mandingo to Mesopotamia, Elam, and Yemen, which fits with that dual ancestry claim. And the Qaeda clan, they founded the Mali kingdom. They even claim Alawite descent, meaning they trace their line all the way back to Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's a direct link to one of the most important figures in early Islamic history.
Wow. What about the Hausa? Where do they fit in?
Their origin story, according to the source, revolves around two key figures. Abdul Dar, who came from Libya and settled in Kusugu, Nigeria, and Abu Yazidu, a prince from Baghdad. The source talks about the famous Hausa kingship tradition, the story of the snake in the well, all tied to Abu Yazidu.
And the Fulani, they're spread across a huge area of West Africa.
Yeah, they're everywhere. They claim descent from Uqba ibn Nafi or Uqba ibn Amir, both companions of the Prophet Muhammad. They're linked to the Tuareg tribe, and their language, Fulfulde, it's connected to Senegalese languages, which might mean they migrated through North Africa.
Fascinating. What about the Wolof people in Senegal and Gambia?
The Wolof, they're said to be descended from Himyarite Arabs, specifically the Sanhaja from Yemen. Their ancestor is Abu Bakr ibn Umar, a cousin of Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the leader of the Almoravids. And the source points out that Senegal itself, the name comes from the Zanaga, a branch of the Sanhaja. And the Almoravid dynasty, this huge empire back in the 11th century, it started in what's now Senegal.
Wow, I never knew that. And finally, the Akan and Ashanti people in Ghana. What about them?
Their traditions say they originated in Timbuktu, which was a major Arab city in Mali. They're also connected to the Dioula people, known for their trade networks. And the source even mentions possible links to those old Mediterranean civilizations, the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians. Some of their customs might even go back to the Canaanites. So we're seeing these recurring patterns, these migrations, these interactions happening over centuries, and they might have shaped the identities, the histories of these West African groups in ways we're just beginning to understand.
It's a lot to take in, but it all points to these ancient connections, these movements of people, these interactions that have shaped both West African and Arab identities in ways we don't often talk about.
Yeah, it's a whole new way of looking at things. And it's important to remember this is a complex topic. There's still a lot of research being done, different interpretations. What we've talked about today, it's based on the evidence, the interpretations in our sources.
Right. So here's something to think about, something to ponder as we wrap up. Given all this information, how does it change your understanding of both Arab and West African identities, histories, those potential ancient connections? What do they mean for the narratives we've been told, the narratives we tell ourselves? This is a journey of discovery, folks, and it's never really over.